Hello, and welcome to this news event held by the law firm Peiffer, Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise, or Peiffer Wolf for short. You'll be hearing from four speakers today, and then we'll open the floor for questions during the Q&A period. The Q&A period will be for reporters only, and if you wish to ask a question, use the raise your hand function, and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. For more info, go to lostembryos.com where you can find the news release, the lawsuit filing, photos, and more. And also, a direct link to the news release is going to be available in the chat window in a moment. As I mentioned, you'll be hearing from four speakers today. First, Adam Wolf, partner, Peiffer Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise. Second, Ashley K. Sletbold, partner, Peiffer Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise. Third, Cara Seldin-Howell. And fourth, Kolton Howell. So let's go ahead and begin with our first speaker, attorney Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf.
Thank you, Max, and welcome to this news conference. My name is Adam Wolf, and I am a partner with the law firm of Peiffer Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise. Today, we filed a lawsuit against CNY Fertility on behalf of our clients, Cara Seldin-Howell and Kolton Howell. Before we hear from Cara and Kolton, I want to go through some of the background. This case involves a couple who were IVF patients at CNY Fertility, a so-called top national fertility practice, operating clinics across the United States. Cara and Kolton traveled all the way from their home in Washington to get fertility help from CNY Fertility, Colorado, in Colorado Springs. They endured a series of tests, multiple hormone injections, and a surgery to collect Cara's eggs. This is an incredibly grueling process, both physically and emotionally. Cara and Kolton's story should have been a success story. They did everything they were supposed to do, resulting in 7 viable embryos. They were elated to start their family. All of their time, effort, and pain seemed to be paying off, finally. However, CNY Fertility failed to properly store the embryos and caused the embryos to dry out and die. So just 2 days after receiving the good news that Cara and Kolton could start their family, their dream family, they later learned that their embryos were destroyed by CNY Fertility. A complete disaster. As you'll hear from my partner, Ashley K. Sletbold, CNY Fertility admitted that was it at fault and told Cara and Kolton that it would institute a new double check procedure in its lab to prevent this from happening in the future. But frankly, when you've been entrusted with a family's future, a family's hopes and dreams, whoops, we'll try harder, is not only an unacceptable and insensitive response, it's infuriating. I want to stress that this tragedy was utterly preventable. It is deeply troubling that CNY Fertility could destroy our clients' embryos and believe a vague promise to start double checking its lab work is sufficient. Its actions speak volumes about the lack of oversight and accountability in the IVF industry. Embryos are special. They're unique. We're not talking about dry cleaning getting lost or a food order getting mixed up. We've represented countless clients in cases involving fertility clinic misconduct, and yet I'm still baffled by preventable tragedies and enraged by fertility clinic responses like we have here. So as we hear from the victims today, let's keep in mind the lack of meaningful fertility clinic oversight that persists that could have easily prevented this tragedy. Currently, nail salons are subject to far tighter state and federal controls than fertility center laboratories. We are, sadly, still in the Wild West days of the fertility industry. That concludes my statement. I look forward to your questions during the Q&A session.
Again, that was Adam Wolf, partner at Peiffer Wolf. Let's proceed to our second speaker, attorney Ashley K. Sletbold, partner at Peiffer Wolf.
Thanks, Max, and thank you, Adam. Thank you all for joining this news event. My name is Ashley K. Sletbold, and I'm a partner at Peiffer Wolf. I'm going to dig into the details of the case before you hear from our clients. Last year, Cara and Kolton sought fertility treatment from Dr. Paul Magarelli at CNY Fertility, Colorado. Based on the recommendations of their doctor, they pursued in vitro fertilization, or IVF. It took months of testing and hormone treatments to prepare Cara's body. And on May 5th of last year, Dr. Magarelli performed a surgical procedure to remove Cara's eggs from her fallopian tubes. Now, CNY Fertility's embryologist combined Cara's eggs and Kolton's sperm in its on-site lab. The next day, a CNY Fertility nurse called to give Cara and Kolton the good news. They had 7 viable embryos to create their dream family. Cara and Kolton were overjoyed. But just 2 days later, Dr. Magarelli called Cara with heartbreaking news. CNY Fertility had destroyed all 7 of the couple's embryos. In that call, Dr. Magarelli admitted to Cara that CNY Fertility was at fault for the loss of the embryos and reassured her that this catastrophe was not her or Kolton's fault. Dr. Magarelli promised to investigate how and why CNY Fertility had caused this disaster. A few days later, Dr. Magarelli called again with the results of his investigation. Dr. Magarelli admitted that CNY Fertility's laboratory failed to use the oil medium required to keep the embryos alive and allow them to grow. On its own website, CNY describes the process that is supposed to occur in the lab. Quote, after fertilization, the embryos are grown in nourishing media that mimics the internal environment of a fallopian tube where early embryonic development naturally occurs, end quote. But CNY Fertility did not do what it promised Cara and Kolton it would do. It did not put the nourishing media in the petri dish so their embryos could survive. By failing to do so, CNY Fertility Colorado caused the embryos to dry out and die. Dr. Magarelli repeated to Cara that CNY Fertility was at fault and there was nothing about the embryos themselves that caused this disaster. The doctor also told our clients that as a result of this tragedy, CNY Fertility Colorado implemented a new procedure to double check embryos after creation to ensure they are safe. But in a lab that touts its state-of-the-art embryology facility, why was no one double checking in the first place? Now, in a moment, you'll hear from Cara and Kolton about their experience living through this avoidable tragedy. IVF failures like this one are all too common, and as the demand for fertility treatment becomes more widespread, we can expect to see more and more of them absent any meaningful controls or oversights. That is the end of my statement. I look forward to your questions.
Again, that was Ashley K. Sletvold, partner, Peiffer Wolf. Let's go to our third speaker, Cara Seldin-Howell. Go ahead, Cara.
Good morning. My name is Cara Seldin-Howell. Last year, my husband Kolton and I went through a nightmare that changed our lives forever. Over the years, we've seen all the news headlines about fertility clinic disasters, but never in a million years did we think that we would be affected. Even knowing that disasters happen, when you go to a doctor with a fancy office, pretty website, and a team of highly paid medical professionals and technicians, those thoughts don't enter your mind. I was shocked to learn about the lack of regulation in the fertility industry. It's unbelievable that my hairstylist is subject to professional licensing requirements, but the people who create and care for embryos are not. Now we know, and we learned the hard way, that failures like these can happen very easily. Sadly, one is probably happening as we speak. CNY Fertility destroyed all 7 of our embryos, and nothing can bring them back. To the employees at CNY Fertility who are responsible for the laboratory failure, this might seem like a minor error. The idea that they would start double checking for mistakes only after such a major disaster makes me wonder why they weren't already double checking, or how insignificant they must think we are to believe that we would just be okay with this. But our embryos were the spark of human life. These embryos were our future babies, until CNY Fertility carelessly destroyed them. I feel robbed of our time, our resources, and the blood, sweat, and tears we invested in this process. And most importantly, robbed of our future and our dream of starting a family. I've been on a roller coaster ride of emotions, joy, elation, excitement, shock, disbelief, grief, sadness, and anger. We went to CNY Fertility because we believed we were doing our best for our future family, but all we got was pain. We received the news that our embryos had been destroyed on the day before Mother's Day last year, which made this loss even more devastating. I would like to thank you all for coming today. We hope that by sharing our story of heartbreak and loss, we might help prevent this from happening to anyone again. That's the end of my statement.
Again, that was Cara Seldin-Howell. And let's go to our fourth and final speaker, Kolton Howell. Go ahead, Kolton.
Good morning. My name is Kolton Howell. My wife and I are heartbroken. This disaster has been the most difficult thing that either of us have ever experienced. Our hope is that by speaking out today, we can prevent this from happening to another family. It's hard to describe all my feelings and emotions about CNY Fertility destroying our embryos, even though I can still remember everything like it was yesterday. It was like emotional whiplash. Within a span of 48 hours, we went from being overjoyed that our dream of starting a family was finally coming true, to having that dream ripped away from us. Even after almost a year, I'm still struggling to process everything. We're still grieving. We are grieving the loss of our embryos, and we are grieving our lost future with these children that we will never be able to meet, see, touch, hold, or protect. A future that was stolen from us by CNY Fertility. Life is still a daily struggle for us. We have good moments, but it doesn't take a lot to be reminded of what we lost. Little things bring the heartbreak back, like passing a newborn in the grocery store or seeing diaper commercials on TV. No one should have to go through this trauma, and it's inconceivable to me that such a preventable disaster could happen here. We hope that our story can help others and push the government to do more to protect hopeful parents like us and the babies that we're trying to bring into the world. That concludes my statement.
Again, that was Kolton Howell. And that takes us to the Q&A portion of the call. If you wish to ask a question, use the raise your hand function and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. As a reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. If you're having any issues with your own audio or the raise your hand function, you can use the text-based Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to all the questions. And before we begin, I want to mention that a video recording of this news event will be available online later today. It'll be at lostembryos.com along with the other media materials. That's lostembryos.com, no spaces. Okay, let's go to our first question. Looks like it's coming from Julie Martin at KKTV. Go ahead, Julie.
Yes, thank you so much for taking my questions. And Cara and Kolton, thank you so much for telling your story. I'm just wondering, have you heard from CNY Fertility or have they reached out to your team at all with any sort of compensation for what they did?
I'll respond to that. Thanks for the question, Julie. We have had some discussions with CNY Fertility, but none of them advanced to the point that this lawsuit was avoidable.
Okay, let's go to our next question. It's from Mallory Anderson at KRDO.
Hi there, thanks for taking my question. I'm wondering, why did Cara and Kolton choose CNY Fertility Colorado in the first place? I've heard that there's a lot of people that actually travel here to use their services, so I'm just curious why you guys came here. Thank you.
We considered a lot of different options. We had consultations with several clinics. When we first heard of CNY, they had announced that they were opening a new location or merging with another clinic in Colorado. We're in Washington State, so We thought that seemed like a good sign. We were excited to find out that we would be able to potentially go to CNY, a location that was geographically closer to us than their other locations. And after having a consultation with one of the doctors at CNY, we felt really good about going there. And we ultimately carefully considered all of our options and decided that CNY would be the best choice for us. Obviously, in retrospect, we regret that decision, but hindsight is 2020.
I'll say something further to that, and I appreciate the question, which is that CNY Fertility Colorado, like so many fertility clinics across the country, advertise that they're the best, that they have the best technology, that their success rates are phenomenal. But what people don't see beyond the sort of glittery lobbies and all the fancy machinery in the front room are the dirty secrets and the misconduct that happens in the fertility clinic labs. In this case, like so many of our cases, exposes what really happens when we have an unregulated fertility industry.
Thanks. Let's go to our next question. It's a follow-up from Julie Martin at KKTV. Go ahead, Julie.
Yes, again for Cara and Kolton. After this tragedy, how do you move on and where do you go from here? Are you able to keep trying in other ways, or are there different ways that you guys are looking at to start a family?
It has been extremely difficult to move on. This experience has definitely derailed our journey to becoming parents. You know, this is a crucial time for both of us, and fertility declines with time. So not only did we lose the time that we spent doing this IVF cycle, but we also have lost a lot of time trying to recover from this loss. We still, more than anything, would like to be parents. And if that means that we have to do IVF again, that's something that we are willing to do. However, I can't say that we aren't afraid of something similar happening. We're traumatized by this experience, and we can't help but think, you know, what if this happens to us again? It happened to us once. What's to stop something similar from happening a second time? So even trying to pursue this another time, it would not be the same because we are looking at it from a completely different perspective. But more than anything, we still would like to have children.
Let's go to our next question. It's from Marissa Sarnoff at Law and Crime. Go ahead, Marissa. And please unmute yourself.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. Karen, Kolton, thank you for sharing your story. This might be a question more for Adam or Ashley. You've talked about this being the Wild West, unregulated. Are you able to tell us at all, are there any efforts to create legislation or any kind of guidelines here? Would those be on a state-by-state basis or on a nationwide level? What can you tell us a little bit more about the status of regulations and laws around this area?
Thanks, Marissa. I really appreciate your question. I think it's a really important question. It was probably 3 years ago now that my law firm, Peiffer Wolf, held a press conference at the National Press Club calling for meaningful oversight, whether it's at the federal or the state level, over fertility clinic laboratories. To date, that has basically not happened. Every so often you hear about a state enacting the most minimal protections, nothing that is nearly as comprehensive as it needs to be, or that we see, frankly, with nail salons or barbershops, and certainly nothing at the federal level. We've had instances in other cases where something has gone awry at a fertility center, and we've called up various federal agencies with the hopes of maybe alerting them to this issue, and each agency says, that's not really our domain. But when we're dealing with something as important as eggs and embryos, sort of the basics of human life, we need to have meaningful federal oversight. We cannot treat this like some used sofa or some takeout food this is vitally important material and it needs to be treated as such by both fertility clinics and the government.
Let's go to our next question. It's from Anna Miller at Insider. And please unmute yourself, Anna. Thank you.
Hi, thanks so much for sharing your story, and I'm so sorry for what you've gone through. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey up until finding CNY and why you decided to pursue fertility treatments to begin with?
We have wanted to become parents since we met, at some point in our future. That was always part of our plan. And after getting married and finding a house, we decided that it was a good time to start a family and try to have a baby. We have faced a lot of disappointment along the way. It didn't go as smoothly or as quickly as we hoped that it would. And ultimately, our local doctor recommended that we pursue IVF and that was our best chance to have a child. And, we faced a lot of challenges, but this has absolutely been the most heartbreaking and difficult part of our experience so far.
Let's go to our next question. It's a follow-up from Mallory Anderson at KRDO.
Thank you. I know that this is not the first case of a fertility disaster like this. I'm just wondering if the attorneys could kind of speak about what you guys have worked on in the past and how this seems to be a recurring issue with different clinics.
I'd be happy to answer that, Mallory. Thanks for the question. My law firm, Peiffer Wolf, has represented thousands of people against their fertility clinics when things have gone wrong in the laboratory of the fertility clinic. This kind of thing happens way too often. Once is too often, these thousands of times, way too often, and it's just not okay. So sometimes you hear, sort of the more sensational stories, if you will, of, freezers breaking down and thousands of eggs and embryos being destroyed at one time. But Cara and Kolton's situation is actually a much more of our normal kind of case where, dishes containing embryos are just negligently dropped on the floor, where the embryos are just left out to die mistakenly, where somebody presses, the wrong button or pulls the wrong lever, and somebody's genetically normal embryos are discarded as opposed to the genetically abnormal embryos. Those are our run-of-the-mill cases, unfortunately. And when I say run-of-the-mill, I mean they're much more common cases, even though they are incredibly traumatic for each of our clients. That needs to stop. And so in answer to a prior question, I believe somebody, maybe it was Marissa from Insider, there was talk about the lack of federal regulation. I mean, in the United States, almost everywhere, embryologists do not even need to be certified. They don't need to take tests. It can be basically anybody who walks in and says, I want to be an embryologist. Or in most states, you can run an egg bank or store embryos in your basement. There are no random, unannounced tests of fertility clinic labs. These are the most common sense, easy ways that are inexpensive and simple to try to stem this tide of fertility center misconduct.
If I could just add to that, part of the regulation that our firm has proposed would include reporting requirements for fertility clinics to have to report when they did make mistakes like this. Because if when Cara and Kolton were searching for the fertility clinic that they were going to entrust with the awesome responsibility of helping them build their family, if they had been able to see accurate data on how often this particular clinic had made such mistakes, I bet we see such mistakes much less likely to happen in the future. And it would give consumers the ability to make rational decisions based on the data about whom they're going to trust with this most awesome responsibility.
Thanks. And we want to make sure that all reporters on the line have a chance to pose their questions. So just as a reminder, if you wish to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand function and your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to ask a question. And as a reminder, the Q&A period is for reporters only. So if you're having any issues with your audio, you're in a loud room, or the raise your hand function isn't working, you can use the text-based Q&A box and we'll try to get to those. And looks like we do have a follow-up coming in, but really quickly, I just want to make sure that you know how to get more info following today's news conference before we take that. To connect with any of the speakers you've heard from today, or to get more info, contact Max Carlin at 703-276-3255. And a recording of this news event and the related media materials will be available online at lostembryos.com. And it looks like we have one follow-up. It's from Mallory Anderson again at KRDO. We'll go ahead and take that. Mallory, don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yeah, one more question. CNY Fertility Colorado is still operating. I just drove past it this morning. The parking lot was full. What would you say to couples that are looking to utilize their services?
I would say to think very carefully about your decision, that this is one situation where you cannot protect your future babies. You're trusting a lab to take care of your children, or your future children. After hearing our story, I hope that anyone that is considering utilizing CNY Fertility services will reconsider. We wish we had seen a story like this before we decided to go to CNY Fertility, because it might have saved us from a lot of pain and heartache.
Thank you. Well, it looks like we have no further questions at this time. We'd like to thank you all for joining this news event held by the law firm Peiffer, Wolf, Carr, Kane, Conway, and Wise. And that will conclude today's news event. Thank you.